Okay, so I think we're live. What do you call a fake spaghetti noodle? Yeah. An impasta. So here we go with our 15th lecture, which puts us a little bit beyond the halfway mark for the semester. So we're making progress. The Constitutional Convention of 1787. So here is where we've already been. James Madison came into that Constitutional Convention having spent his whole summer studying Greek history, coming to the conclusion that direct democracies are unstable and that a republic, one based on a scheme of delegated authority to representatives, was more likely to stand the test of time. Bless you. And Madison, along with his delegates from Virginia, surprised everybody by not just suggesting revisions for the Articles of Confederation, but presenting an entirely new scheme of government, a whole new constitution, which came to be known as the Virginia Plan. This was a unicameral Congress with representation based on the population of the states. At that time, Virginia was one of the most populous states, so it would have had many representatives. Massachusetts was a very populous state. Massachusetts would have had quite a few representatives, but there were some smaller states, less densely settled, like Delaware, New Jersey, and they would have had relatively few representatives. So they were a little bit worried about it. It also featured an executive office, a president, and had the power to tax, which the Articles of Confederation had lacked. The small states were worried that they might get drowned out by the populations of the larger states, so they frantically came up with a counter-proposal known as the New Jersey Plan, which was very similar, but had a Congress, a single house of Congress, in which every state had an equal voice, same number of representatives. And the result was our modern frame of government, and one of the great ID terms for the final exam of all time, the Great Compromise. That is simply the combination, bringing those two plans together to form a bicameral Congress, two houses of Congress, pretty closely modeled on the old British Constitution, in which there was a House of Commons and a House of Lords. But in this new scheme of government, I think you guys all know what it looks like. The House of Representatives is based on, just like the Virginia plan, based on population. The number of representatives is based on population. And in the Senate, every state has the same number of representatives. I have a fabulous prize, this lanyard with a clip, for the first person who can tell me how many representatives the state of Wyoming has. Who said that? Nicely done. I also have this unused, brand new paper towel for anyone who can tell me how many representatives the state of Idaho has in the Senate. Do you really want the towel? So, every state has two. The state of, use it wisely, my friend. So the state of Wyoming with, correct me if I'm wrong, only 3 to 5 in certain places, 3 to 5 persons per square mile, has the same political power as New York, which in some places has millions of people per square mile. So the Great Compromise coming out of the Constitutional Convention, 1787. There were some anti-democratic elements to the new Constitution because I don't think I have said this aloud adequately just yet, so I'm going to try and think of a way of getting it on the record. Madison and the rest of those constitutional delegates, or a large number of them, had always seen the major problem in front of them in creating a new national government as being basically this. And they referred to it that way, the great problem. How to create a government of the people that derives its powers from the consent of the governed. How to create a government of and by the people that is not at the mercy of the foolishness of the people. Because they had discovered during the Articles of Confederation that although that wasn't government of and by the people were not funding the government. They didn't want to pass tax laws, so they needed a government that was voted into office or depended on the will of the people for its legitimacy, and yet was able to force the people, even when the people didn't want to pay taxes, to pay taxes. So this was a bit of a dilemma. One of the ways they achieved their aims, they hoped, was by creating some bulwarks, ways of protecting itself, of the government's protecting itself from the people, should the people be motivated at some point in history by unhealthy or irrational passions that were not in the best interests of the general welfare. So just a few highlights. A little bit obscured by the camera there, election of senators. Nowadays, we can cast a vote for our state senator, but that was not the case until the early 1900s when an amendment was passed. Initially, the senators were not elected by the people. They were appointed by the state legislatures. The state legislators were elected by the people, but then they would discuss amongst themselves who was best suited to be a state senator, and they would appoint that person for the state. The hope was that the result would be a better sort of person, someone who had perhaps more education, was better suited to that sort of thing than the ordinary person who might be electioneering and trying to gain favor with the people. And the Senate was, the terms of a Senate seat were a little bit longer than the House of Representatives, 6 years. Once you were in the Senate, you were there for 6 years. You didn't have to worry about being nice to those people back in the state legislature. Or, under today's terms, didn't have to worry about going back out on the election trail and trying to please people. You had 6 years of safety during which you could think about the deeper issues and what was best long-term for the country. House of Representatives, politicians have to go out every 2 years and win re-election, so they are very, very attuned to what the people are thinking, or at least that's the theory. And the Supreme Court. So hidden behind the camera here, election of senators, and now Supreme Court. Are Supreme Court justices elected? One person, and one person only, is shaking her head no. That is the correct answer. Did you guys all know that and just didn't want to participate? How do you become a Supreme Court justice, Avery? The president appoints you, You're approved by the Senate. Max, what do you call a fake spaghetti noodle? An impasta. It's getting better, isn't it? Yeah, the president appoints the Supreme Court justice. And how long is their term? Yep, it's a life. I forgot to do my ASMR. How long does a Supreme Court justice serve? For life. How come? What's that? Yeah, there are no term limits whatsoever. How come? That doesn't seem like a great idea, does it? Life term? Well, the thinking was very similar to longer terms for the senators, so they wouldn't have to worry quite so much about the people. But the founding fathers, so-called, James Madison, the rest of them, they wanted a judge who would not be watching all those angry people outside the Supreme Court building, who are always marching about with signs and so forth. They wanted the Supreme Court justices to think only about the Constitution and the letter of the law, what the law actually said, so that they would not feel pressured by Democratic pressure. I don't mean that as the Democratic Party. Pressure to run for re-election. So life term, it was thought, protects them. Ariana? Yep. We have a certain number. Do you know how many Supreme Court justices? 9 Supreme Court justices. Every once in a while, we have a politician who thinks about the so-called court packing. When the Supreme Court's not doing what they want them to do, they think about, well, let's add some additional justices so that we can get our guys on the court and maybe get a favorable opinion. But at present, 9. Refreshing. But that's not very democratic. That's a way of protecting against democracy. Having a Supreme Court justice who's not elected and never runs for re-election and never gets fired. And, they basically retire when they're on death's doorstep. And slightly, again, obscured by the camera, the Electoral College. Are you guys in favor of the Electoral College? Max is saying no, JJ's saying no, Lily's saying no, Lucy's saying no, Ariana's, huh? The Electoral College means you don't really vote for the president. You go out and you mark your ballot in South Carolina, and then there are electors. The president is elected by state electors. In every state, the number of electoral votes is based on the number of members and the delegates in the House of Representatives plus the 2 senators. So that determines the number of electoral votes in each state. So based on whoever appears to win the popular vote within the state, then all of the state electors go to that candidate or vote for that candidate. So your vote, in many ways, I'll let YouTube viewers decide whether this is an accurate way of framing it. Your vote is a suggestion as to what the electoral voters should do, and then they're the ones who actually vote for the president. In the early days of the Republic, the thinking was the Electoral College could act as a safety net, that if the American people were so foolish as to elect someone unfit for office, then the electoral voters could step in and change the outcome of the election, vote for somebody else. Nowadays, it's become standard practice that whoever gets the popular vote, wins the majority within the state, automatically gets the electoral votes without much more ado. Well, this new system of government once it was ready for ratification, had to go out and face the people, and the people themselves had to approve it in state conventions, ratify it all around the country. So the Federalist paper you read quite a few as part of the online quiz, but the one I brought into class was written by James Madison, Federalist paper number 10, in which he was talking about the dangers of factions. It was originally published in a newspaper. John Jay wrote essays in support. These were all written in support of the new Constitution to try and convince the American people that this was the thing to do. Create a strong central government that could force them to pay taxes. And the singing and dancing founding father, Alexander Hamilton, wrote many of the essays as well. And they've now been collected into book form and are known as the Federalist Papers generally. Those were written in support of the new Constitution to try and convince American people that this was a good idea. But there were many famous voices on the other side who thought that this was not the way they wanted the government to go. You may recognize a few of these names. Patrick Henry, perhaps most famously, the give me liberty or give me death speaker from Virginia. In Patrick Henry's opinion, they had just fought a revolution against a government that had this kind of military power and the power to tax them, even against their will. So he did not want this kind of powerful central government, and he was concerned that it might trample on the rights of the people just the way the British Empire had been doing a decade before. If they were to agree, George Mason and Patrick Henry, the basic message to Madison and other Federalists was, if they were to agree, then they would have to have some protections for the American people written into the Constitution. Alexander Hamilton said it was not necessary, and Madison said it was not necessary too, because those protections were already there. But Patrick Henry wanted explicit guarantees that the government would not try to shut the American people up, that they would have the right of free expression, freedom of speech, that it would not try to impose a state religion, that they would have freedom of religion. And you might take a quick look. I don't intend this as a political point at all, but Patrick Henry was the author of the original Second Amendment, one of our most frequently talked about amendments today, the right to bear arms. And when he saw our current Second Amendment, as adopted by James Madison and the new Congress, is about 3 lines long, he was absolutely furious because he had written at least 2 paragraphs for the Second Amendment. And he had many, many reasons why he felt strongly about it, which were left out. So the original intent of Patrick Henry, at least in Patrick Henry's view, was missed, was left out. or major parts of it were left out of the Second Amendment. But the first 10 amendments, and Madison was good to his word. Once the new government was ratified, Constitution was ratified, and they met for business, they did pass, in modified form, at least 10 of the 12 proposed amendments that Patrick Henry and George Mason and other anti-federalists had written. So the first 10 amendments of the Constitution we now remember as the Bill of Rights. They have to do with the rights that we, the people, still have. Even though we have this new powerful government, we still have the right to speak out and assemble peacefully, to petition for redress of grievances, the right to bear arms, a number of other things. I'd like you guys to think about a problem. I'm going to shut us down here.